The sun burned hot over the endless desert, painting the sky in deep orange and yellow colors. Heat waves rose from the sand, making the land look like it was moving. The silence of the frontier was broken only by the sound of the wind brushing against dry bushes and the cries of faraway birds. In that lonely place lay a fragile figure, a young Apache girl. Her name was Nayeli. Her dark hair, tangled with dust, clung to her face. Her lips were dry and her eyes were half closed from weakness. She had not eaten for days. Her legs shook whenever she tried to move, and finally she could not walk anymore. She collapsed beside a dry riverbed, hoping the night might bring some coolness and maybe, just maybe, a little strength. Nayeli had once been full of life. She had run across the hills with her brothers, played by the streams, and laughed with her mother while gathering berries. But that life seemed like a dream now. Everything had changed when raiders attacked her small village. The shouts, the fire, the fear, those memories kept coming back. She remembered running into the darkness with her people. She remembered stumbling and falling. Her ankle had been hurt badly. The others, frightened and desperate to escape, had left her behind. At first, she thought they would return for her. She waited all night. But when the sun rose, she realized no one was coming. Alone, she started walking, dragging her hurt foot, looking for water, looking for hope. But the desert was unforgiving, and each day her body grew weaker. Her breaths came slowly now, each one painful. She wondered if this was where her life would end, under the burning sun with no one to hear her last cry. She closed her eyes and whispered in her native tongue for her mother, asking for comfort. The desert gave no answer. Far away, another soul moved across the land. His name was Ethan, a cowboy who had spent years traveling alone. His horse, a strong chestnut stallion, carried him with steady steps. Ethan had just finished delivering cattle to a ranch town a few days back, and now he was making his way to a quiet place where he sometimes stayed, a small cabin near the river valley. Unlike many cowboys who laughed loudly and spent nights drinking in saloons, Ethan was quiet. He spoke little, worked hard, and kept to himself. People said he was a mystery. Some said he had lost something long ago. The truth was, Ethan carried a heavy sorrow in his heart. Years ago, he had a wife and a child. Both were taken by illness during a harsh winter. Since then, he had wandered, searching for peace but never really finding it. As he rode across the desert, he noticed how still everything was. Even the wind seemed to stop. That was when his horse snorted and slowed, as if sensing something ahead. Ethan narrowed his eyes and scanned the land. At first, he saw nothing but sand and bushes. Then near the dry riverbed, he spotted what looked like a bundle of cloth. Curiosity pulled him closer. When he dismounted and walked over, he realized it wasn't cloth at all. It was a person. Ethan knelt down. He saw a young girl, her face thin from hunger, her small hands trembling slightly. He touched her arm gently. Her skin was burning hot from the sun, yet she felt fragile, almost weightless. For a moment, he thought she might already be gone. Then her eyelids moved, and he saw a flicker of life in her eyes. She looked at him with fear and confusion. Her lips moved, but the sound was so faint it was almost a breath. She whispered one word, "Help." Ethan froze. His heart tightened. He knew she was Apache. He had seen her people before, proud and strong. But this girl was just a child, broken by the cruelty of the land and by the hatred that burned between settlers and tribes. Helping her could mean trouble. If others found out he had taken in an Apache girl, they would judge him, maybe even threaten him. For a brief second, he thought about walking away. After all, he had spent years avoiding other people's fights, keeping only to himself. But as he looked at her, something stirred inside him. He saw not an enemy, not a stranger, but a helpless soul. Someone abandoned, someone who deserved a chance. Her eyes reminded him of his daughter, who once reached for him when she was sick and weak. That memory was enough. Ethan could not turn away. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was. She weighed almost nothing, her body weak from days without food. He carried her to his horse and placed her gently across the saddle. Then, with steady hands, he climbed up and held her safely in his arms. The horse began to move slowly, its hooves pressing against the sand, carrying them both away from death's shadow. The ride was long, and Ethan spoke softly to her even though he wasn't sure she understood. "Hold on, little one," he said in a low voice. "You're safe now. I've got you." She blinked once, as if hearing him through her haze of pain and exhaustion. That small sign gave him hope. At last they reached the cabin, hidden near a group of trees that grew close to a shallow creek. The cabin was simple: wooden walls, a small bed, a table, and a fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Ethan carried her inside and laid her on the bed. He rushed to get water from the creek, letting a few drops touch her lips. At first she barely reacted, but slowly she swallowed. Then he gave her small pieces of bread softened in water, careful not to overwhelm her weak stomach. Each sip and bite seemed like a battle, but with each one her breathing grew steadier. Ethan sat by her side, watching her sleep. The lines of pain on her face softened a little. For the first time in days, she wasn't alone in the desert. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel entirely alone either. He leaned back against the wall, his eyes heavy but his heart strangely lighter. Outside, the desert night came with stars shining brighter than any lantern in town. Coyotes howled in the distance, but inside the cabin there was silence and safety. The cowboy had found the girl just in time. Fate had brought two lost souls together, and though neither of them knew it yet, their lives were about to change forever. Ethan had not planned for this. He thought the desert would only give him silence, maybe some peace, and then lead him back to his cabin for a quiet meal and rest. But now, instead of silence, he had the faint sound of a young girl breathing beside him. Her fragile body lay on the bed he usually used for himself. He pulled the chair close and kept his eyes on her, afraid that if he looked away, she might slip from this world forever. The night was long. The stars outside glittered, but inside the small cabin the only light came from the faint glow of the fire he built in the corner. Ethan stayed awake, adding wood to the flames, checking the girl's forehead and giving her sips of water whenever she stirred. Sometimes she mumbled words he could not understand. They were soft, carried by a language not his own, but he knew they were prayers or memories. It reminded him of nights long ago when he had cared for his own child, who had also whispered weak words while fighting illness. That memory stung his heart, but it also gave him strength to keep helping this girl. When morning arrived, Ethan went outside to gather more water and to feed his horse. The desert had cooled and a fresh wind moved across the land. He filled a small bucket from the creek and returned to the cabin. The girl was awake now. Her dark eyes watched him with suspicion, but also with something else, fear and need. She tried to sit up, but her body trembled. Ethan set the bucket down and raised his hand slowly, showing her he meant no harm. "You're safe," he said quietly. His voice was rough but gentle. "Drink." He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. At first she hesitated, as though she expected a trick, but her thirst was stronger than her fear. She reached out with shaking hands and sipped. Drops of water spilled down her chin, but she didn't care. For her, it was life itself. Ethan nodded, glad to see her drink. He took out a small piece of bread he had softened with water and offered it. She took it slowly, nibbling carefully. Every bite seemed to take effort, but there was determination in her eyes. Hours passed. Ethan did not ask questions yet. He knew she needed strength before she could speak. Instead, he busied himself around the cabin, cutting wood, checking his supplies, and watching the horizon for strangers. Every now and then he looked at her, making sure she was still breathing steady. By afternoon, she finally spoke in broken English. Her voice was weak but carried a trace of courage. "My name, Nayeli," she whispered. Ethan froze for a moment, surprised to hear her name. He repeated it softly, trying not to frighten her. "Nayeli," he said. She nodded. She looked at him and tried to ask a question. "What, you help?" Ethan's throat tightened. He wasn't a man who spoke much about his feelings, but her question was simple, and it deserved an answer. He sighed and sat down near the bed. "No one should be left to die," he said slowly. "Not you. Not anyone." Nayeli lowered her eyes as if unsure how to respond. For a while, they sat in silence, only the sound of the fire filling the room. Ethan noticed her hands trembling as she held the cup. He reached out and steadied it, careful to be gentle. She looked at him again, this time with a little less fear. The next few days were a test of patience. Ethan had to nurse her back to health with what little he had. He hunted small animals in the woods nearby and cooked them over the fire, giving her the softest pieces so she could eat. He made soup from dried beans and herbs, feeding her spoon by spoon. At night, he gave her his blanket and kept the fire strong so she wouldn't shiver in the cool desert air. As her strength returned, so did her words. She told him bits of her story. She spoke of her village, of her family, and of the night it all changed. Her voice broke when she described the raid, the fear, and the moment her people fled without her. Her ankle had given way and she had fallen behind. They hadn't come back. Ethan listened quietly. He didn't judge, didn't interrupt. He knew pain when he heard it. And though their worlds were different, Cowboy and Apache, the wound of losing family was something they both understood. Nayeli began to trust him, little by little. She watched the way he cared for his horse, the way he respected the land, and the way he spoke little but did much. She realized he was not like the stories she had heard of men who only brought destruction. Ethan, too, found himself learning from her. She showed him how she could read the land, the marks in the sand that told of rabbits passing, the way the birds circled in the sky, the signs of water hidden beneath dry earth. Even in her weakness, her spirit was strong, tied to the earth in a way Ethan had never seen. But not everything was safe. Ethan knew the world outside the cabin could be cruel. Settlers and tribes were at odds, and anyone who saw him with an Apache girl might think the worst. More than once he caught himself glancing toward the horizon, half expecting riders to appear and bring trouble. One afternoon, as he was cutting wood, Nayeli limped outside for the first time. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright with determination. She wanted to walk again. Ethan set the axe down and went to her side. He offered his arm, and though she hesitated, she took it. Step by step, she moved forward, leaning on him when her ankle gave her pain. "You're strong," Ethan said quietly. She shook her head. "No, weak." He looked at her firmly. "No, weak people give up. You didn't." Her eyes softened, and for the first time since he found her, she gave a small, fragile smile. That night, as the fire burned low, Ethan thought about what would come next. He had saved her life, but now what? He could not keep her hidden forever. The town nearby was filled with people who already whispered about him being different. If they discovered Nayeli, they would not show kindness. Ethan knew he would have to make a choice soon. For now, though, he let himself rest. The sound of her breathing was steady, no longer the shallow gasps of a dying girl. It gave him a strange comfort. Maybe, just maybe, saving her had saved a part of him too. And in the stillness of the desert night, two very different lives had begun to weave together, bound not by blood but by compassion, courage, and the simple decision to help when no one else would. Days slowly turned into weeks, and in that quiet cabin near the creek, a fragile bond began to grow. Nayeli, the young Apache girl, was no longer the dying child Ethan had found in the desert. Her cheeks held a little color now. Her voice was stronger, and though she still limped when she walked, she pushed herself to move every day. Ethan watched her with quiet pride, though he never said much. He wasn't a man of many words, but his actions spoke loudly. Every morning he would rise early to fetch water, feed his horse, and check the land around the cabin. Nayeli, still wrapped in the blanket he had given her, would sit by the fire and wait for him to return. Sometimes she tried to help by preparing the small meals he showed her how to cook. She wasn't used to his food, beans, bread, dried meat, but she ate without complaint, grateful for every bite. And slowly she began to share more of herself. Her English was broken, but her stories carried strong feelings. She told Ethan about her childhood, how her people believed in living close to the earth, how her mother had taught her to weave baskets and her father to track animals. She told him about songs sung by the fire, about laughter with her brothers, and about the freedom she felt running barefoot across the grasslands. But whenever her words touched the night of the raid, her voice grew quiet. The pain of that night was still too deep, and Ethan never pushed her to say more. Ethan, in return, shared pieces of his past, though not all at once. One evening, as the sky turned pink and purple, he sat on the porch sharpening his knife while Nayeli sat nearby weaving strands of grass into a small mat. She asked softly, "Why? You alone?" The question struck him. He kept his eyes on the blade, but after a moment he answered, "I had a family once. Wife and a little girl. Illness took them." His voice was rough, filled with sadness that had never left. "Since then I travel. Work when I can. Keep to myself." Nayeli lowered her head as if respecting his pain. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, a strange relief, as though telling her eased the weight in his chest. As the days passed, they began teaching each other. Ethan showed her how to saddle a horse, how to shoot a rifle, though she hesitated to touch the weapon. He also showed her how to mend torn clothes with rough thread. In return, Nayeli showed him how to read signs in the land. One morning she bent near the sand and pointed to faint tracks. "Rabbit," she said. Ethan squinted, surprised he hadn't noticed. She smiled faintly at his expression, a small spark of pride shining in her eyes. One evening, when the moon was full, she led him to the creek and pointed at the plants growing near the water. She explained in her slow English which ones could be boiled to ease pain, which could help heal cuts. Ethan listened closely, realizing she carried knowledge passed down through generations. It humbled him. He had always thought himself self-reliant, but this girl knew things about survival that he had never learned. Yet outside their small circle of peace, the world was not quiet. In the nearby town, whispers had begun. A ranch hand passing near the creek claimed he had seen Ethan with a girl, dark-haired, not dressed like a settler. The story grew, and soon townsfolk began to murmur that Ethan was hiding an Apache. Some shook their heads, saying he was foolish. Others clenched their fists, saying it was dangerous. The air between settlers and tribes had been tense for years, and fear made men cruel. Ethan didn't know how much the town suspected, but he felt the change. Whenever he rode in to buy supplies, the stares lasted longer. Conversations hushed when he entered. He ignored them, but he knew trouble could come. He didn't tell Nayeli at first. She had been through enough. But in his heart, he knew the peace they had found might not last forever. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, life grew lighter. One afternoon, Ethan returned from hunting with 2 rabbits. Nayeli clapped her hands softly, pleased with the meal they would share. She helped him skin and cook them, and together they sat by the fire eating the simple stew. Ethan noticed how her eyes shone in the firelight, how different she looked from the frightened child he had found in the desert. She was growing stronger, not just in body but in spirit. Later that night, she hummed softly a tune from her childhood. Ethan sat still, listening. The melody was gentle, filled with both sadness and hope. It stirred something deep in him, a reminder of lullabies once sung in his own home. For the first time in years, he felt warmth inside his heart. But even as their bond deepened, shadows grew. A few days later, Ethan rode into town for flour and salt. At the general store, he noticed the way men looked at him. One leaned close to another and whispered. Another spat on the ground as Ethan passed. Finally, a man at the counter spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Word is you got company out there, cowboy. Not the kind folks around here take kindly to." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. He paid for his supplies and walked out. As he mounted his horse, he could feel their eyes burning into his back. He knew the time of hiding was ending. When he returned to the cabin, Nayeli saw the heaviness in his face. She asked, "What wrong?" He hesitated, then told her the truth. "Town knows they talk. Some might come here." Her eyes widened with fear, but then steadied. "You'd send me away?" she asked quietly. The question cut deep. Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, I won't." She looked at him with surprise, as if she had expected to be abandoned again. For a moment, tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back. She understood now that this man, this cowboy, was not like the others. That night, neither of them slept well. Ethan sat by the window with his rifle close, watching the horizon. Nayeli lay awake, listening to the wind outside. Both knew their peace was fragile. Both knew the next days would test them more than ever. Yet, in the middle of the fear, there was something else too. A bond had formed. 2 lives from different worlds brought together by fate and by compassion. And no matter what dangers waited, that bond was stronger than loneliness, stronger than hate. The cowboy who once walked alone had found someone who reminded him of his lost family, someone who gave him purpose again, and the girl who had been left to die had found someone who would not leave her, no matter the cost. The desert was wide. The world was harsh, but in that small cabin, 2 hearts from different worlds had collided and found strength in each other. The days that followed felt like a storm quietly building on the horizon. Ethan and Nayeli could sense it, though the skies above were still clear. Each moment of peace inside the cabin felt fragile, as if the walls themselves were holding back the anger of the world outside. Ethan tried to keep things as normal as possible. He hunted, he cooked, he taught Nayeli how to care for the horse. Nayeli continued to grow stronger, walking further each day, her limp lessening with time. But both of them knew that trouble was coming. It came sooner than expected. One afternoon, while Ethan was chopping wood near the cabin, the sound of hooves echoed across the land. His horse raised its head, ears twitching nervously. Ethan froze, axe in hand, and listened. The sound grew louder. More than one rider, maybe 3 or 4. He set the axe down and walked slowly to the edge of the trees, his eyes narrowing. 4 men appeared on horseback, riding hard. Dust swirled behind them. They were townsmen, faces Ethan recognized from the general store and the saloon. Each carried a rifle or a pistol strapped to his side. Their expressions were sharp, filled with suspicion. When they spotted Ethan, they slowed their horses but didn't dismount. "Well, there he is," one of them said, a tall man with a wide hat. His name was Carlton, a ranch hand known for his loud mouth and quick temper. "Thought we'd pay you a visit, cowboy." Ethan didn't move. His voice was calm but cold. "What do you want?" Carlton smirked. "Heard some talk in town. Folks say you're keeping company out here, not the kind we take kindly to." His eyes swept toward the cabin. "Why don't you tell us who you got hiding in there?" Ethan's hand rested lightly on his belt where his revolver hung. He didn't draw it, not yet. "Ain't none of your business what I do out here." The other men shifted in their saddles, uneasy but firm. One of them, a younger man named Doyle, spoke up. "If it's true you got an Apache girl here, you're bringing danger to the town. Raiders'll come looking. We can't have that." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew their words weren't really about safety. They were about fear and hate. "She's just a girl," he said slowly. "She's hurt. She's got no one else. I won't hand her over." Carlton's smirk twisted into anger. "Then you're a fool. You think you can keep her here? Town won't stand for it. We'll burn that cabin down if we have to." At that moment, the cabin door creaked open. Naili stepped outside. Her steps were slow, but her back was straight. She had heard their voices, and though fear shone in her eyes, she walked forward anyway. Ethan turned sharply, his heart pounding. He wanted to tell her to go back inside, to stay hidden, but Naili kept moving until she stood beside him. The men stared at her. For a moment there was silence. The wind carried dust between them. Naili lifted her chin, her voice trembling but steady enough to be heard. "I am Naili," she said in broken English. "I am not danger. I'm only girled alone. This man saved me. He good." Her words struck the air like a stone hitting still water. Carlton frowned. "Don't matter if you're only a girl, you're Apache. That's enough." Ethan stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Naili. His voice dropped low, filled with steel. "You'll leave now. You want to burn something, you'll have to get through me first." For a tense moment, it seemed blood might be spilled right there. The men tightened their grips on their reins, their hands brushing their guns. Ethan's fingers twitched near his revolver, his eyes never leaving Carlton. Naili's heart raced, but she stayed firm, standing in the shadow of the man who had chosen to protect her. Finally, Doyle, the younger man, broke the silence. He looked at Naili, then at Ethan. His voice was quieter, uncertain. "She doesn't look dangerous, Carlton. She looks like a child." Carlton shot him a sharp look, but the doubt had already spread. One of the other men shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just tell the town what we saw and let the others decide." Carlton cursed under his breath. He glared at Ethan one last time. "This ain't over, cowboy. You keep her here, you'll answer for it." With that, he yanked his reins and turned his horse. The others followed, though not all of them looked sure. The sound of their hooves faded into the distance, leaving only silence behind. Ethan let out a slow breath, though his hand stayed near his revolver until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned to Naili. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a fire he hadn't seen before. "You shouldn't have come out," Ethan said softly, though there was no anger in his tone. "I must," she whispered. They must see I am not ghost or monster. Only person." Ethan studied her for a long moment. He realized she was braver than he had given her credit for. She had faced the very people who wanted her gone, and she had spoken for herself. It had taken more courage than most grown men could ever summon. That night the cabin felt heavier. Ethan kept watch by the window again, his rifle resting across his knees. Naili sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Finally she spoke. "They will come back." "Yes," Ethan admitted. "Maybe with more. Then, what we do?" she asked. Ethan looked at her, at the girl who had been left to die and who now stood taller each day. He thought about the town, about the hatred that ran deep. He thought about his own loneliness, the years he had spent wandering without purpose. For the first time he knew what he wanted to do. Not run, not hide, but protect. "We stand," he said firmly. Whatever comes, we face it together. Nayeli nodded slowly. Her hands trembled, but her heart felt steady. For the first time since she lost her family, she did not feel completely helpless. She had someone who saw her not as an enemy, not as a burden, but as a person worth protecting. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the desert stretched wide and endless, waiting for the next test of courage. Inside, in that small wooden cabin, a cowboy and an Apache girl prepared themselves for whatever storm was about to break. They knew the price of compassion was high. But they also knew that some things, human dignity, kindness, the chance to live without fear, were worth the fight. And though the night was dark, there was a light between them that no hatred could put out. The next morning, the air carried a heavy silence. Ethan stepped outside, scanning the horizon as always, but this time his chest felt tighter. The men who had threatened them could return at any moment, and he knew it might not be just 4 riders next time. They could bring more, maybe even a mob from town. Nayeli joined him on the porch. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a question. "They come?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe not today, but soon." For a moment, neither spoke. The desert stretched before them, endless and beautiful, but also dangerous. Ethan had spent years facing the harsh land, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about choice. Would he risk everything for this girl? He already knew the answer in his heart. Yes. Inside, Ethan began packing supplies. He gathered what food he had, filled water canteens, and tightened the straps on his saddle. Nayeli watched him quietly. At last she asked, "We leave?" He paused, looking at her. "Yes, town won't stop until they see you gone." "If we stay, it'll end bad." Nayeli's lips pressed together. Leaving meant giving up the little peace they had built in the cabin. But she understood. She had lost her home once before. What mattered now was survival and the bond they shared. She nodded. That evening, as the sun set behind the ridges, Ethan saddled his horse. He lifted Nayeli gently onto the animal's back, then climbed up behind her. The cabin that had sheltered them for weeks stood silent. For Ethan, it had always been a place of loneliness, but with Nayeli, it had become something different, almost like a home. As they rode away, he felt a pang of sorrow, but also a sense of resolve. They traveled west, away from the town, away from the whispers of hate. The land grew rougher, with canyons and hills breaking the horizon. They camped beneath the stars, eating what little they could hunt. At night, Ethan kept watch, his rifle always close. Nayeli would lie beside the fire, sometimes humming the songs of her people, soft melodies that carried into the darkness. Those songs gave Ethan strength, reminding him that even in loss there was still beauty. One night Nayeli asked him, "Why? You not afraid?" Ethan chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "I am afraid. Every man is. But I learned long ago, fear only matters if you let it stop you." She thought about his words, then nodded. "You save me, even when danger." That courage. He looked at her, surprised by her honesty. For years he had seen himself as nothing more than a broken man wandering the desert. But in her eyes he was something else, someone who had given her hope. As they journeyed further west, the bond between them grew stronger. Nayeli grew healthier with each passing day. She began to walk without limping, and her laughter, small, quiet at first, returned. Ethan found himself listening for that sound, treasuring it more than anything. It reminded him of his daughter, but also of something new, the possibility of life moving forward. Not everything was easy. One afternoon, they reached a small trading post. Ethan needed supplies, so he tied his horse nearby and walked inside with Nayeli close to him. The room fell silent as soon as they entered. Men at the tables turned to stare. The shopkeeper's smile faded when he saw Nayeli. Ethan felt the weight of their eyes, but he kept his voice steady. "Flour, salt, beans, and ammunition." The shopkeeper hesitated, glancing at Nayeli again. "We don't serve her kind." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then serve me. She's with me." His tone carried no room for argument. For a long moment, no one moved. Finally, the shopkeeper gathered the items, his hands shaking slightly. Ethan paid and took the supplies, keeping his eyes locked on the men who still stared. He led Nayeli out without another word. Once outside, Nayeli whispered, "They hate me." Ethan stopped and turned to her. "No, they fear what they don't understand. That's different. Hate is their choice, but we don't have to let it change who we are." Her eyes softened at his words. In that moment, she realized that Ethan wasn't just protecting her. He was teaching her how to carry strength, even when the world was cruel. As the weeks passed, Ethan and Nayeli found new lands, places untouched by towns or raids. They built small fires, gathered food, and shared stories by the creek. They weren't father and daughter, not by blood, but their bond felt like family. Ethan found himself smiling more often, something he hadn't done in years. Nayeli, once a helpless child abandoned in the desert, now stood tall and strong, her spirit unbroken. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with gold, Ethan watched Nayeli skipping stones across the water. Her laughter echoed against the rocks. For the first time in years, he felt peace in his chest. He realized something powerful, that saving her had saved him too. He walked to her side, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You've come a long way, Nayeli," she smiled up at him. "Because you not leave me." Ethan's throat tightened, but he nodded. "And I never will." They stood together, watching the river flow. Behind them lay a world of hardship, of hate and loss. But ahead was something new. A life they would build together, not bound by blood or tribe, but by choice. As the days turned into months, their journey continued westward. They met kind strangers along the way, people who offered food or shelter without questions. They also met others who looked at Nayeli with suspicion, but Ethan's steady presence always kept her safe. Each trial only made their bond stronger. In the end, the cowboy who once lived only in sorrow found a reason to keep riding. And the Apache girl who was once left to die found not only life but family in the unlikeliest of places. The story did not end with a grand victory or a dramatic battle. It ended with something simpler but stronger: hope. On a quiet morning, with the sun rising behind them, Ethan and Nayeli rode together into the horizon. Two souls from different worlds, united forever by fate and by the courage to stand against fear. The desert, once a place of despair, had given them a second chance. And together, they carried forward a story that would never be forgotten. A story of compassion, courage, and a bond that changed both their lives forever.